In this video, I want to cover the differences between how luminosity masks are created in Lumensia versus traditional luminosity masking, because they aren't exactly the same. I've made some tweaks in Lumensia that I think really enhance the quality of the masks. However, there are some situations in which the traditional approach may be beneficial, and Lumensia lets you go and select masks either way. If you just click on one of the masking layers, you'll get this default black and white mixer. And it's been designed to be more sensitive to colors. You notice that some colors like yellow here, even when they're highly saturated, will be selected, and other colors like blue less so. And that's just some of the properties of how I've kind of defined this. Because if you look at the underlying image, blues tend to be a bit darker than yellows and should have some fall off, and this looks a little bit extreme here in the Lights 5 mask, but in general this is a very appropriate selection and is actually a lot more generous than the traditional approach. Versus the traditional approach, which we can load up in Lumensia just by simply holding down the command key on a Mac or control on a PC and just click. So right now we have a Lights 4, and if I just command or control click Lights 4, you'll see the black and white layer has been replaced with this image layer marked traditional, and this is the exact same conversion you would get with a traditional mask for Lights 1, and then the conversion to bring it to a Lights 4. So this is what Lights 1 looks like, and then here's the conversion to Lights 4. And you notice between what we had before, so here was the default Lumensia and here's traditional masking. So in Lumensia you'll notice that saturated colors get more selected, and in traditional masks everything other than yellow is less selected. And so what that means is, with a traditional mask, if you have a really punchy, vibrant sky, luminosity masks are going to treat it as if it's almost not there. So with Lumensia, it is going to be a little bit more sensitive to many colors, although blue is not necessarily one by default. But if you need to adjust that, you can just simply grab the black and white mix here and drag up the blues to whatever you want it to be. So if I bring it up to 100, now the saturated blue is the same as pure white. It's fully selected across this range, or nearly fully selected. So you have the capability of getting to that within Lumensia however you want to. But I just want to point out that the default values are not exactly the same as traditional masks when it comes to color images. When it comes to black and white images, if that's your starting point, then there is no difference. But for color images, there is a little bit of a difference. Another thing that I want to point out is that in Lumensia, we're getting there in two steps. We're making one conversion and a second conversion. And so the values are going to be fairly clean. In traditional masking, you can get a little bit of posterization, or at least you're just more prone to it. So I'm going to click on a Lights 5 mask here. And if we then take this and compare it to traditional masks, I'm going to hide this for a second. I'm going to run my traditional masking options here. So this is my free masking actions available on my website, and run this. And let's open up the channels palette here. And so let's just see. So here's what we got out of Lumensia for a Lights 5 mask, just straight out of the software. And then here's what we get when we look at the traditional masks here. So it's a pretty big difference, actually. We need to go back a step here. So here's the actual, sorry, because I made that adjustment. Until you clear these layers, Lumensia is not going to redraw these, because that just saves time. So if you ever did have that, you can just simply X out to get rid of it, and then load the layers back up, and the black and white's going to be back to the original default values. But until you clear these, it will kind of hold whatever you have put in there. So here's what we got out of Lumensia, and I'm just going to zoom in on some of the values here. Let's take a look at the blues over here. And you can notice that there is a little bit of posterization in this image. This is I believe a 16-bit, yep, it's a 16-bit image. And if we just compare that to traditional masking, if we click here, you see that there's much more posterization in the image. Or if we look at, say, here's the, I think this is the green channel. So here's that's the traditional value, and if we go back, here's what we're getting out of Lumensia. So Lumensia, much smoother gradation of tones versus the traditional approach where you had to build lights 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 math steps to get down here. So by the time you get down there, you've somewhat degraded the image to look like this versus this original, or this is the finished image. Because when I click on RGB, I'm showing the Lumensia value. So this is Lumensia Lights 5, and here's the Lights 5 from the traditional approach. So I can't say that this is necessarily going to show up in your images. If you had a very extreme adjustment, or maybe like an 8-bit image, it may be a little bit more prone to it. In general, because of the subtlety of the mask, this is probably not going to cause you a lot of problems. But I just want to mention that that is one difference between these approaches. Because Lumensia is getting there in fewer steps, it's just a little bit cleaner in terms of the results there. So just as a reminder, if you ever want to get to a traditional approach in Lumensia, just simply hold down the Command or Control key, click on the curve you want, and you'll see it show up as traditional. And then when you apply it to some layer, that'll carry through. You'll see it shows Lights 5 traditional, and that's just a reminder to you that it was generated using the traditional black and white conversion as opposed to the black and white mixer that Lumensia uses by default.